Good evening, everyone. Erev Tov. Welcome to the wilderness this evening as we continue our year-long journey through the Haftarah portions that coincide with that Torah lectionary that's read around the world. And this week, we're still going to be in the Torah portion in the book of Exodus, but I think it should be somewhat, hopefully, interesting for you because we're going to see an aspect of how the Torah, as well as in the book of Judges, how the Hebrew Bible is graphic. And how that helps us in some ways interpret it or even link passages together. So that should be interesting for us, as well as just reviewing a good classic biblical story in the book of Judges. So let's get started with the blessing, and then we'll talk about where we're at in the scriptures. We begin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitishanu bo mitzvitav vesivanu le'asok b'divrei hadavar. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to be immersed into the words and the matters of Holy Scripture. Amen. So this week brings us to the portion known as BESHALACH. BESHALACH. It is the 16th portion of the Torah's 54 divisions, and it is in many ways the heart of the book of Exodus. The Torah portion covers Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, and goes through chapter 17, verse 16. And we're going to be interacting with it some this evening because of how it appears in our Haftarah, which takes us in the book of Judges. So the Haftarah portion this week for BESHALACH is Judges chapter 4, verse 4, and goes through chapter 5, verse 31. And so, again, the 16th division. So that's where we are located and where we will be spending our time, essentially in Judges chapter 4 and 5. And the great temptation with the Haftarah is because it's not so big you can't really cover it, but it's just big enough where if I'm not careful, I could keep going and going. So tonight's, again, may go a little longer than some, but it's just so we can complete the whole lesson. It's one of the advantages of the Haftarah, where you can see the Torah portion is much larger and so forth. So with that, let's kind of dive in. First with that bigger macro view of where we're at in the text, what is surrounding it, kind of getting ourselves contextualized to the book of Judges, and then we'll dive in a little more specific, looking at the summary of this week's portion. So where we're at is after Moses was the leader of the Israelites, he had a successor named Joshua. And Joshua led the children of Israel in the conquest of the 7 Canaanite nations that were in the Promised Land, that were in the Holy Land, and what we would know essentially, but not exactly the same as modern-day Israel, that there were a series to say that Canaan was a nation is incorrect. There were 7 Canaanite nations. One of them was called Canaan, but there were 6 others that kind of functioned as a confederacy and so forth. And Joshua is the individual who brought the Israelites across the Jordan and into the Promised Land. Because remember, Moses in Deuteronomy passes away just before that event. And Israel's military campaigns had toppled Canaanite kings and strongholds. The people of Israel took root in the land. Joshua's successes alarmed a certain individual known as King Jabin, Jabin, one of the Canaanite lords of an area known as Hazor. Hazor is right up there with Armageddon, and again, we'll see the Armageddon importance yet again this week. So time and time again, we're seeing why Armageddon pops up in Revelation, because it is in many ways the prototype, the fractal, the foreshadowing, the blueprint of the ultimate battle. Hazor's kind of right behind it. And King Jabin, or the Canaanite lord Jabin of Hazor, was a little bit alarmed by what Joshua was doing, and so he fortifies his city of Hazor, that's set in what's known as the Hula Basin. It was kind of like a cork in a bottle, and again, it's right by Megiddo. And so, if you were controlling Hazor and Megiddo, you were controlling that funnel that connected Europe and Asia and Africa. And so it controlled these very important trade routes. The book of Joshua explains in Joshua 11, verse 10, that Hazor formerly was the head of all of these kingdoms. And so Hazor was kind of a major junction. The archaeology of Hazor confirms the city as quite significant, having a very significant Canaanite population at the time of this week's Haftarah, with remains as early as the 27th century BC. So that's very old, all right? You're approaching 3,000 years before the time of our Messiah. Hazor was a major city. And again, the reason is obvious. If you control that Hazor, Megiddo kind of area funnel, you control quite a bit, and you are in a position to take lots of income and taxes and so forth. And so King Jabin rallied the forces of all the surrounding kind of coalition of Canaanite people to take a stand against these, what they would have viewed as tribal invaders, that is, Joshua and the Israelites. The Canaanites came out, and their armies with them. This is Joshua 11, verse 4. As many people as the sand on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots to fight against Israel. That kind of motif of chariots kind of plays, again, that verbal connection with our readings that are in the book of Exodus, because it was the Egyptian chariots that got stuck in the Red Sea. And so that's going to be an important connection the sages see. The Lord then tells Joshua, again, Joshua 11:6, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will deliver them slain before Israel, and you shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So we have again this promise of the Lord that I'm ultimately your king. I'm ultimately the one that provides protection and safety for you. Trust me, and you won't lose a battle. And Joshua, for the most part, was very good at following those instructions. And so the Israelites routed the Canaanite armies. Joshua, as 11:10 of his book says, captured Hazor, struck its king with a sword, and burned Hazor with fire. By the time Joshua died, the Israelite tribes controlled much of the land that God had promised to them. So for the most part, but not exclusively, there were some pockets. They had indeed settled the promised land. But Canaanite powers did persist in these pockets. Moses prophesied that the conquest of Canaan would not be instantaneous. He tells in Exodus 23, verse 29, God speaking, "I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out before you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land." After the death of Joshua, the tribes of Israel no longer had any central leadership. This becomes a very important theme for the book of Judges. Joshua did not have a successor after him the way Moses had set up Joshua. In part, that's a failure of Joshua's leadership. One of the key aspects of any good leader, no matter how young they may be, how thriving they may be, they are always thinking about their organization, where it's going in the future, and how it will keep going in the future, even if they are not part of it. And that means often preparing for your successor, even if you really don't have in mind an exact date for that. And so Israel, as at this point, a loose confederation of tribes, they're not a nation yet. We haven't had David come and unite them. They're just this confederacy that live here and here. Dan is here, and Issachar is here, and Judah is here, and Benjamin is here, and Simeon is here, and Manasseh is over here. And they agree at times they may come to each other's defense, but by and large they live separately, and they govern themselves separately, and there's no central leader. And that is going to be important. Again, working as a loose coalition, a tribal confederation, where each area, each tribe was under the leadership of local judges. So when you're reading through the book of Judges, like if you're reading through it in a year, or you just decided it would be fun to read the book of Judges, and you encounter all these different individuals that were judges, don't imagine that they were one after another and that they each were the judge of all of Israel. Many of them were contemporaries, and they weren't the judge over all of Israel. They were the judge of their local area. Each one had its own set of judges acting independently of one another. And these judges did things much like what Moses did, what Joshua did. They administered Torah law, they settled disputes, they rallied community support when it was necessary for military campaigns. But again, they lacked that authority to unite all of Israel under one administration. Without a central administration, the judges were unable to effectively enforce certain aspects of God's law, especially the prohibition against idolatry. What tended to happen is, again, those pockets of Canaanite influences, nations, that local tribe just found, we just get along better if we accept them and accept some of their practices. Maybe they accept some of ours. It's what's called syncretism. We'll give a little, you give a little, and over time you have this kind of blend, and soon enough, that local tribe of Israelites is accepting of pagan gods and idolatry. And then we have this very famous phrase that occurs often in Judges. One such example is Judges 17, verse 6, where it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel," no central authority, "and so every man did what was right in his own eyes." Now, I want to clarify a little bit of that, because how that is often interpreted is everyone did what was right in his own eyes, that this was just the wild, wild west, and it was just chaos, and it was relativism, and everyone just decided what was right for them. And in many ways, it can sound like that's what the verse is saying. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. But that's actually not contextually, when you read it in context with the rest of Judges, what it's saying. It's saying there was no king. There was no central authority. There was no absolute. And because of that, the people had no other alternative but to try to figure it out themselves. It doesn't mean they had bad motives in it. It just meant they had a leadership vacuum. And because there was a leadership vacuum, people had to do what people had to do. And that's not going to be unique to Israel. That would be unique to a company or a congregation. If all of a sudden Immanuel no longer had any pastors, all three pastors left, and the principal of the school left, you would have a major vacuum, and you would have all kinds of people going, "Finally, it's my chance. Got it. Yes." And they would be asserting what they thought was right in their eyes all of these years. This is how it's supposed to be. And they would have their reasons. Many of them would be coming from good motivations even, but they would all have agendas because there is no central leadership guiding them in one direction toward one vision. That's what is really meant by there was no king in Israel, and so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They had no vision caster. They had no, where are we headed? What is our goal? What are we about? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to accomplish it? How will we know when we get there? And so they just did the best that they could. All right, which we're going to find out wasn't very good. All right, when there's a leadership vacuum, usually dysfunction and chaos follow and fill that vacuum. And so, because of this, Israel does fall into a recurring cycle, a cycle of religious apostasy. Then, because they will kind of get lax in their connection to God. They then are oppressed. God allows oppression, usually from a foreign nation or a Canaanite nation. And then they cry out to the Lord that they've done wrong. They repent. And then they are delivered and they promise reform, to which they enact for a little while. And then the cycle begins again. And the reason it begins again is because there is no king in Israel setting forth, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is how we get it done. And so the cycle begins again. Apostasy in Judges always begins with idolatry and syncretism. This, we can just get along with our neighbors if we just kind of accept them for who they are. They're not all bad. Maybe they got some good ideas. Maybe how they worship would look good in how we worship, and maybe we can incorporate some of that in us. It always begins like that. And because there's no central leadership, there's no one to go, yeah, no, we don't do that in our house of worship. Yeah, no, we don't go that direction. And then, as a result of that disconnection, what we would call punishment, right? Because of this infidelity, there is God allowing an oppressor from a hostile nation or people. The people cry out to the Lord. He sends a redeemer to deliver the people. The redeemer then judges the people, sets them right. The Hebrew word for judge doesn't just mean wagging your finger and punishing them. It means straightening that which is crooked. That's what the Hebrew word for judge means. So the judge would set things right, get things in order, and then promise covenant fidelity. And then the cycle would begin again. As the tribes floundered without this king, with every person just doing the best that they could, and this tribe in northern Galilee, like Zebulun, not really being in sync with this tribe in the south, with Judah, right, and not being on the same page, the Canaanite powers found ways to recover some of their dominance in the land. The city of Hazor rose from the ashes. Joshua had burned it, but it rises from the ashes more than a century after Joshua burned it. A new Canaanite king took that old dynastic name, Jabin, and reasserted Hazor's sovereignty over the northern territory. The tribes of Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, and Asher lost complete control of their territories. In fact, they lost their territories to the Canaanites. Judges 4, verse 2, the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. 1 Samuel 12:9, they forgot the Lord their God, and he sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the army of Hazor. And so Sisera is going to become an important figure in this week's portion. So that's kind of the bigger view of what brings us into the Sitzim Leben, the culture of the time of living in the Judges. So imagine, for instance, if the United States lost its president and its vice president. We'll even think true cataclysmic event. The Speaker of the House, the Vice President, and the President gone. You'd have chaos. You'd have absolute chaos. And probably something along the lines would be, well, for now, each state's going to take care of itself. The governor of Michigan is going to take care of Michigan, the House of Michigan, the Senate of Michigan. We're going to each take care of ourselves. We're going to do what's best in our eyes. right? But you would quickly see, with no central leadership, with no federal government, right, things would go into chaos. That's the period of the judges. But periodically, somebody might arise that could rally the troops, set things right in certain regions. Remember, the judges are regional, so even when a judge like Gideon or someone comes on the scene and saves the day, he's only saving the day there. He's not saving the day for the other 11 tribes. They still have their own issues. So what's going on in this week's portion, more specifically? So the Haftarah in BESHALACH tells the story of how Deborah, a judge and a prophetess over Israel, and Barak, a Naphthalite leader and warrior, mustered an army of Israelites to challenge the Canaanite king Jabin of Hazor. Deborah and Barak led their forces to a place called Mount Tabor, which we've encountered before in our Haftarah, in the Jezreel Valley. That's always giving us the hint of Armageddon. Jabin's general, Sisera, led the Canaanite chariot force to intercept them. Again, we have this chariot idea. Sisera positioned his forces between the Israelite force and the critical strategic pass at Megiddo and Ta'anach. The Lord provided Israel with a miraculous victory by unleashing a torrential storm and flooding the Kishon waterway. The floodwaters and the muddy ground, were in portion BESHALACH. What in the world could possibly come to mind when you hear about flooding waters destroying an enemy of God's people? Right? It's the Torah portion. So you're beginning to see the connection already. Sisera escaped the battle and took refuge in the tent of a woman named Jael, of Canaanite descent from Moses' father-in-law Jethro. And while Sisera slept, Jael punctured his head with a tent spike. To celebrate the victory, Deborah uttered a song under prophetic inspiration, which recaps the story. The Song of Deborah, which is kind of the highlight, which is from Judges 5, it's kind of the highlight of this week's Haftarah, has survived intact from at least the 12th century BC. It has been known in the form it's in since at least the 12th century BC, which is essentially when she first uttered these words on the day of battle. And because of that, the Hebrew poetry is archaic. It wouldn't even be like you reading the King James Version. It would be like you reading the Tyndale or the John Wycliffe version of the English Bible, which if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to give that a little try. That's how archaic it is. It's a very old form of Hebrew, older than like the rest of the book of Judges. So like you can clearly tell it was quoted and put in there because it maintains that archaic Hebrew. And because of that, it's difficult. Just like reading John Wycliffe or William Tyndale is difficult for us, even though it's all English, but Middle English to forming modern English to postmodern English isn't always an easy thing to do. The song concludes with a graphic description of Sisera's death and an ironic depiction of his mother awaiting his return from battle. So that's the Haftarah. Some of its connections to the Torah portion in Exodus. Because remember, this is important for us because it helps us interpret the Haftarah, and it also helps us understand the Scriptures as a whole unit. So in this week's Torah portion in Exodus of BESHALACH, we see Moses and the children of Israel cross the Red Sea. When the Egyptian chariot forces pursue them, the Lord throws their army into confusion and then drowns them in the sea. After the drowning of the Egyptians in the Red Sea, this week's Torah portion records, Exodus 14, verse 28, not one of them remained. That's going to be an important verbal tally. Moses and the children of Israel then celebrate this victory with Miriam, or with dancing and celebration, and then singing a song. Moses has a song. So you have this God defeating the enemies of Israel through a flooding, chariots being drowned and stopped in the mud, with a great victory celebration climaxing in a song that will go through the generations. That's in the Torah portion. Well, that's exactly what you have in the Haftarah portion in Judges. In the battle with Sisera's chariot force, the Lord confused the Canaanite army and then overwhelmed them in the waters of the river Kishon. In Judges 4, verse 16 says, "Not even one was left." An exact quote of Exodus 14, verse 28. So you have that connection. Like Moses and the children of Israel, Deborah and Barak celebrated with a song. And Jewish scribes also wrote out the Hebrew for both the Song of the Sea, which is what the song in Exodus, as well as the Song of Deborah, in an unusual staggered format. It visually connects the two texts. So it's on the back of your handout. You have these two images. So you have, which is on the screen, but also, it's on the back of your handout. On the left side, that's an actual handwritten Torah scroll. And you can see, even if you don't read Hebrew, you can clearly see there's some different formatting going on in one area of that, right? You can see in one column how it looks kind of normal, word after word, and even below, words after word. But you have that section of writing. That's the Song of Moses in Exodus. And really what that's trying to graphically portray is the parting of the Red Sea. You can see a right side and a left side, and then the people going in the middle. Right? That's what it's graphically trying to represent. On your right side, because I have access to a Torah scroll, I don't have access to a handwritten scroll of Judges. If you would like to donate and get me a scroll of every book of the Old Testament, I'm up for it. But currently I don't. So all I have is my paper copy of the Hebrew Bible. All right? But it's formatted the way it is in the scroll. And you can see it looks just like the Exodus portion. This is the only two places in the entire Hebrew Bible that has this unique formatting. So visually even, not just thematically, and not by just even using the same words and phrases, though those are there, it's visually they are linked by this. So that's what makes these two portions unique in the entire Hebrew Bible. Nowhere else in the Hebrew Scriptures do you have that kind of formatting. You have other unique formattings, but not that one. And they have been written that way as long as we ever have had or have found any kind of recording of scrolls being written. Okay? And so the Song of the Sea in this week's Torah reading concludes with a prophecy. And this is also what links them. The Song of the Sea in Exodus, that song ends with a prophecy about Israel's defeat of Canaan. A prophecy that finds fulfillment in the story of Deborah. So you also have essentially prophecy and fulfillment connecting these two. Exodus chapter 15, beginning in verse 15, says, "All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread will fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm, they are motionless as stone, and your people will pass over." So it has this prophecy that God's people will defeat the Canaanites. And you have a fulfillment of that in the Haftarah portion. So those are lots of neat connections between them and why the sages selected it. Now with that, let's dive in to some of the text. So Judges chapter 4, verse 4, and right away we're immediately met with a translation conundrum. It says in most translations something of this nature. "Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lepidot, was judging Israel at that time." And I have Lepidot underlined or bold, kind of to draw our attention, because there's different ways you can handle this. Different ways you can translate this verse. This is the most traditional way. It meets a lot of boxes, especially checks lots of boxes that, even though we finally have a woman who's in charge and running things, let's never forget, though, she's defined by who her husband is. Something my wife loves. This is not Trisha a nurse. This is Pastor Chad's wife. She loves being introduced by her name or who she is or what she's done in life, but by being my wife, right? So this particular translation preserves that kind of patriarchal view of how to translate the Bible. The thing is Lepidot, while it can be a place, we don't particularly know that it is or where it's all about, it also means something. And so it's already described her as a prophetess. It's already described her as a judge. Maybe it's describing her as something else and not trying to define her in terms of her husband. Now, the name Deborah, or Devorah in Hebrew, means bee. B-E-E, like the little bumblebee. Here is a more literal reading of Judges 4:4. Again, if you ever get yourself a copy of the FIV, the Foster International Version, this is how Judges 4:4 would read. Now Deborah, a prophetess, a woman of torches, because wife and woman are the same thing in Hebrew. A woman of fire was judging Israel at that time. And torches is the word lopitot in Hebrew. That word means fire, torches. She's a firecracker, right? I like that. And I think it fits better with your giving 3 ways of describing her. She's a prophetess. She's a judge. And she's fiery, and that fits the rest of the narrative of who Deborah is. This bee that will sting you. Raubag understood the expression woman of torches to mean that she was, again, a woman who was fiery, a decisive spirit. It's another way you can understand that word, lepito. One Talmudic tradition explains the construction of this verse to refer to her occupation as a maker of wicks for the menorah and the tabernacle. Again, still understanding that it wasn't trying to describe her of whose wife she was, but it was trying to give you more information of who she is, and it has something to do with fire, that she makes the fire in the tabernacle. The people of Israel respected Deborah as a prophetess, that she was inspired by the Spirit of God. In fact, rabbinic tradition lists her as one of 7 principal prophetesses. Her fame as a prophetess gave her an exalted status in the judicial system. And like Moses seated in the seat of judgment in Exodus 18, she functions as a high court, settling cases that lower courts, lower judges, lower officials could not handle. They went to Deborah, much like they went to Moses. So in the Haftarah, Deborah is the Moses figure. Moses, for instance, told the children of Israel in Deuteronomy 17, if any case arises requiring decision between one kind of homicide and another, one kind of legal right and another, or one kind of assault or another, or any of your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place the Lord your God will choose. At the time of Judges, the Lord had not yet chosen Jerusalem, but Deborah and the other judges of the era filled this role of the high court nonetheless. And just as Moses said, you shall arise and go up to that place, the book of Judges says in Judges chapter 4, verse 5, the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. Now Deborah, we know the place where she did this. She conducted her court beneath a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of the tribe of Ephraim. It was in many ways kind of in central Israel. The palms there were known as the Palm of Deborah, either because she owned the date palm trees there, or they had long since been named for Deborah afterwards, as well as another Deborah in Jewish tradition from that area, known as recorded in Genesis 35. Did Deborah sit on the ground underneath a palm tree while people gather around here to hear her judgments? Well, no, that's not really what Judges 4 verse 5 is trying to say. Rather, it's saying this from the FIV. She used to reside under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel. That is to say, that's where her house was located. That's where she used to live. That's where she used to reside. And so they would come to her house, which was under a palm tree. Litigants came to her house beneath the palm to seek her wisdom and her spiritual insight. The shadow of Hazor, Judges 4, verse 5. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah, because that's where her house was, between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. The sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. Again, in the absence of that central authority, Israel had no king, and it had no chief prophet like a Samuel. The tribes of Israel looked to the judges for leadership. Men from the territory of Naphtali and Zebulun, they traveled to Deborah's court in the hill country of Ephraim to lay their complaint before her. So she's good enough where her reputation is kind of spread. And so even those from other areas outside of Ephraim, the text is telling us, are coming to her because of her wisdom. And these that came from Naphtali and Zebulun, which, by the way, are messianic significance, for Isaiah tells us, out of Zebulun and Naphtali, the Galilee of the Gentiles, the Messiah will come. Naphtali and Zebulun, that's where Capernaum and Nazareth are found. Two of the main home bases of our Messiah. These individuals come to Deborah, and they tell her about how the Canaanites had rebuilt the city of Hazor and how a new king, Jabin, had taken power there. And for the last 20 years, Jabin has used a chariot force to control the Hazor-Megiddo highway. The commander of Jabin's forces, a cruel warrior named Sisera, oppressed the sons of Israel severely, Judges 4:3. He sorely beat the Israelites when they fought with him, and he ordered them to pay tribute. In other words, like a mafia boss. You don't want me roughing you up, you don't want me messing with you want me to leave your farms alone, then you're going to pay me. For fear of Sisera's chariots, the Israelites abandoned the roads. In Judges 5, verse 6, the highways were deserted. Travelers went in long, roundabout ways. They did anything they could to avoid that passway. The rural people were vulnerable to Sisera's cruelty, his oppression, and his extortion. The peasantry ceased, and they ceased in all of Israel. No one dared defy this Canaanite lord. No warrior would rise up in Israel to rally and to go against this seemingly overwhelming foe. Judges 5, verse 8. Not a shield or a spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. Deborah considered the situation, and she knew that these things befell Israel because of the sin of the people. It's one of the things the judges were able to see, that ultimately this goes back to that whole cycle of apostasy and syncretism. God allows oppression from a hostile force. Deborah sees this and says, this is what is going on. She mused in Judges 5, verse 8, new gods have been chosen, and these are why there is war in the gates. And that is why the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of Canaan. Judges 5:9, my heart goes out to the commanders of Israel, the volunteers among the people, she said. So what was to be done? This was the case laid before her, that there is this cruel Canaanite kind of revival popping up and oppressing this area. So Deborah inquires of the Lord, and he answers her by means of the Holy Spirit of prophecy. The Lord gave her a message to give to Barak, the Naphthalite, from the tribe of Naphtali. So what is this word of the Lord that she was given as a prophetess to then speak to another judge, Barak, a judge of Naphtali? Because remember, these tribes would come together if they felt it was an issue of security. So Deborah sees that, believes this is not only kind of like when we finally get involved in World War I or World War II, when we finally realize, this isn't just Europe's problem. This isn't just a France problem or a Germany problem or an England problem. This is a world problem. Deborah sees, this isn't just a Naphtali and Zebulun problem. This is going to be all our problems soon. That's what God tells her through the Holy Spirit. And he says, take this word to Barak of Naphtali. What word does she bring? Judges chapter 4, verse 6. Now she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kedesh Naphtali. Barak, the son of Abinoam, was a Naphthalite leader from the village of Kedesh. The name Barak means lightning. Be kind of ironic or neat a little bit later in the story. Joshua and the Israelite forces had taken Kedesh from the Canaanites in the original battle against the OG King Jabin of Hazer and his Canaanite alliance. So you kind of have this history repeating itself even with the same name of the king. The village of Kedesh was nestled on the southwest side of the Sea of Galilee, again in the territory of Naphtali. Joshua had set it aside as a city of refuge. God instructed that there be certain cities of refuge. This was one of them. Kedesh stood between Hazer and Beit-Shan, territory under the king Jabin. In the days of Deborah and Barak, Sisera's chariots routinely rumbled past the village, and Barak must have been a man of prominence within the tribe of Naphtali. His reverence for the prophetess Deborah proves that he feared God, that he listened to God. And he accepted her summons, and he made the trip to the palm of Deborah in the hill country of Ephraim. And this is what the prophetess declared. This is written in Judges chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. She said to Barak, "Behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand." So she goes to Barak and says, "I want you to work with Zebulun, and I need you to come up with 10,000 men, and I'm going to need you to then go and do some battle against Sisera. I will draw him out." Barak does not doubt the prophecy, but he does doubt himself. And this is where, again, we get the idea that Deborah as being fiery is probably the accurate description as opposed to who's her husband. It says, he considered himself unworthy of such a momentous miracle, and he felt that he needed the merit of the prophetess to ensure the success of his mission. This is what he tells Deborah in Judges 4, verse 8. "If you will go with me, then I'll go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." In other words, Barak says, unless you, woman, accompany me and 10,000 men, I won't go. He wants Deborah to go. She's fiery, right? Deborah consents, but she expressed her disapproval through another prophecy. She predicted that because Barak refused to go without her, that Sisera, he would fall. Just as God had said, but he would not fall to Barak. He would fall to a woman instead of Barak. Now, naturally, Barak is probably assuming that's Deborah. So he's probably like, okay, so what you're saying, if you and I go together, in the end, I'm not going to get credit for this, you will. Okay, I can handle that. It's not what's going to happen, though. Barak and Deborah returned to Kedesh. Barak sent a summons to the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. Deborah called the remainder of the regional tribes to muster together at Kedesh. Judah and Simeon were apparently not included in this. The Reubenites, the half-tribe of Manasseh, they did not bother to respond. But the rest of the tribes did, and they sent men. Men of Issachar, Zebulun, Naphtali, those most hard oppressed by Jabin and Sisera, provided the majority of the forces. Deborah and Barak set out with a force of 10,000 men toward Mount Tabor, just as the Lord had commanded and revealed to Deborah, his prophetess. The army of Armageddon. Here's Armageddon yet again, right? Judges chapter 4, verse 12. Then they told Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor. One does not muster an army without drawing a little attention. Word of a peasants' revolt soon reached Sisera, and as it's recorded in Judges 5:19, so those troublesome tribesmen are coming out of their holes, Sisera believes. He has no fear. What can several thousand peasants on foot, how can they challenge 900 iron chariots? So Sisera was pleased to have the opportunity in his mind to stomp out this Israelite menace at one time and in one place. And so he summoned all of King Jabin's vassals to send their military support. And in Judges 5:19, the kings came and fought, and they fought the kings of Canaan. Sisera learned that Barak, the Naphthalite of Kedesh, and his force of Israelites were camped at Mount Tabor. Sisera anticipated their next move. He thought they would surely cross the Jezreel Valley and take the Megiddo Pass. That was their hope. A position that would then allow them to control the routes in and out of the Jezreel Valley and leave a gateway open for reinforcements from the other tribes. Once entrenched in those hills, the Israelites would have the advantage over the chariots. Chariots aren't climbing these hills. So Sisera stationed his forces on the plains of the Jezreel Valley between Megiddo and Mount Tabor. This is what's known as the Plains of Armageddon. From the slopes of Mount Tabor, Deborah looked out over the plains below. The Israelites and Barak himself were so frightened at the multitude of the enemies that they were resolved to march off. But Deborah had to restrain them. Again, she's not just someone's wife. She's a woman of decision and fire. She and Barak could easily see Sisera's chariots' forces drawing up along the banks of the Kishon River, which are also known as the waters of Megiddo or the waters of Armageddon. So far, everything had happened just as the Lord had predicted and said needed to go. Barak had mustered the army and he had brought them to Tabor. Sisera had come out and taken up his position along the Kishon. And the Lord had promised Barak, Judges 4, verse 7, I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. The brook Kishon arises from two branches, a southeastern branch flowing from a source in Gilboa, and halfway across the Jezreel, a northeastern branch in the Tabor plain. For most of the year, the united Kishon is only a very shallow, at best I would describe it as a meandering creek that winds its way through the Jezreel Valley and eventually below Mount Carmel before it kind of trickles off into the Mediterranean Sea. Barak knew that he would be foolish to take his men down onto the plain. Better to stay on the high ground where the chariots were useless. Wiser to make Sisera try to take the hill than go down to him on the plain. Deborah, though, has another strategy. She prophesied to Barak and his men. She said these words, Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you. Judges 4:14. She's leading like Joshua did. She's leading like Moses. Like, we don't have to worry about the victory. We don't have to worry about if that makes sense if we have the men. We don't have to worry about the most logical battle plan. The Lord has said, do these things. We've done them. And he said if we do them, he will give us the victory. So get up. Quit being afraid and take action because this is the day. Barak and his forces made their charge. They listened to Deborah. As Barak and his men began their descent from the slopes of Tabor, which would have seemed foolish to them, as they're going down, the angel of the Lord Judges 4:15, routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army. This is interesting because here is a link to the Torah portion of this week. In Judges chapter 4, verse 15, the verb being used there is the Hebrew hamam. It's the same Hebrew word used to describe the confusion that smote the Egyptians in the midst of the Red Sea. So, from this week's Haftarah portion, Exodus 14, at the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians, like Deborah and Barak looked down, through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into Hamam. And that's the exact phrase used in Judges as what the Lord did to Sisera's army. It uses the exact phrase from this verse. And he caused the chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So as the Egyptians crossed the Red Sea, the Lord causes the chariots to swerve, and he swept them away beneath the collapsing water. As Barak's warriors descended upon Sisera's army, the Lord unleashed a great cloudburst. And there came down from heaven a great storm with a vast quantity of rain and hail. Hail, book of Exodus, our Torah reading. And the wind blew the rain in the face of the Canaanites. And then lightning flashed around. What did I tell you Barak's name meant? Lightning. Little pun going on in the Hebrew here. Barak crashes down upon them. The Song of Deborah, as we'll talk about in a minute, indicates an unseasonable storm when it says, the stars fought from heaven, from their courses they fought against Sisera. The ordinary placid streams of the Kishon waterway leapt up into rushing floods, and the torrent swept away the chariots, much like the Egyptian chariots. Sisera's charioteers found their wheels hopelessly mired, their horses wild and filled with terror as water pounded down on them, and the hoofs beating, dashing, it says, the valiant steeds. So this chaos ensued, and horses went nuts and caused injury to one another, and the chariots were useless. And so Barak and his men then pursued the Canaanites as far as Harosh Hagoim, which was Sisera's hometown, his base of operation. And then Judges 4:16 says this, not even one was left, which is the same thing that Exodus 14:28 from our Torah reading this week says of the Egyptians, that not even one of them was left. So this week's portion gives us Deborah, the fiery woman, but it's also got another, I would say, cantankerous woman in it as well, and that is Jael. Jael the Canaanite. Let's read this text, Judges 4, verse 17. Now Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. So Sisera gets out of there alive. He's fleeing in the Jezreel Valley, back towards Kedesh, back towards his hometown, with Barak and his forces in fast pursuit. After running and dodging for 12 miles or more, he was no doubt exhausted and probably could go no further. He saw the tents of Heber the Kenite and decided to prevail upon Heber for asylum. As it says, there was some kind of peace between them. So he thinks, well, this can be my place of refuge. I can at least rest here. I can at least get food and water here. I can at least have time to think about what my next move is going to be. The Kenites were nomadic, and they were a Midianite tribe. They descended from Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. Moses' father-in-law was a Kenite priest, and his son Hobab accompanied the children of Israel into the land and participated in the conquest under Joshua. But then the Kenites kind of settled down in Judah, south of Arad, and they went and lived with the people, Judges 1:16. In the days of Deborah and Barak, Heber the Kenite left the clan and moved north to settle near Kedesh with his family. and they were in good standing with their Canaanite overlord. As the text says, there was peace between them. And Sisera believes that he will be safe there. He may not have been aware of the deep connection between the Kenites and the Israelites. Again, Moses' father-in-law connection, and that they came out of Egypt with the Israelites, and they helped conquer the Canaanites under Joshua. So the Kenites not only have these good relations with their Canaanite overlords, they have a deep, long history and a good relationship with the Israelites as well, and perhaps Sisera was ignorant of that. But Jael perceives at once that he's fleeing from this battle with the Israelites from Barak, and so she coyly invites him into her tent. Her invitation in the Hebrew is very seductive. I think the translators soften it so that you don't get scandalized by it. But it's seductive. That's all I'm going to tell you. I won't scandalize you either, other than to tell you it should scandalize you. She says to him, "Turn aside, my master. Turn aside to me." She says something a little more forward. "Do not be afraid." Sisera asked her to hide him and to deny that he was there if anyone should come looking for him. She concealed him under a rug. Judges 5:25. He asked her for water. She gave him milk. Why would she do that? Ever heard of, my little baby won't go to bed? Well, have you tried giving him warm milk, perhaps? Right? So she brings him warm milk with a bunch of food. I'm going to put that guy to sleep. The milk encouraged is a gesture of hospitality, which would have been accepted and seen as the norm in the culture. And so Sisera would have thought, well, things are going like they're supposed to. But Jael had some other motives. She gave him his warm milk, made him drowsy, then covered him so that he would fall asleep. Tucks him in the rug, right? Swaddles him. Warm milk, swaddled, full belly. It's the recipe for going to sleep. As soon as he was asleep, Jael drove a tent peg through his head with a heavy hammer. Deborah and Jael, right? She then found Barak and brought him to the tent. And that's the fulfillment of Deborah's prophecy. Thus was the victory gained by a woman. Just as Deborah had foretold, the honor will not be yours, Barak. Sisera will fall to the hands of a woman. He thinking Deborah, but in the end it was Jael. The song of Deborah, Judges chapter 5, verse 1. Then Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang on that day. Again, in this week's Torah portion from Exodus, Moses and the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea with a wall of water on the left and a wall of water on the right. The Egyptians tried to pursue them. God drowns them in the sea. And Moses and the children of Israel celebrate with a prophetic song. Both the song of the sea and the song of Deborah are prophetic oracles that were sung in celebration of miraculous victories. Very similar miraculous victories. And therefore they have that same, as you see on the back of your page, that same kind of archaic Hebraic structure and poetry. Scribes write the Hebrew for both songs according to that pattern, visually filling the page in an identical manner. Of these similarities, not to mention the common victory over a chariot force by means of a supernatural deluge, make the Song of Deborah the obvious choice to be the counterpart of the Song of Moses, the Song of the Sea. Deborah opens by blessing the Lord for raising up the army of Israel. Then she addresses the song to foreign kings, lest they ever consider coming after the children of Israel again. She offers a brief theophany similar to the one in Deuteronomy 33, verse 2, depicting as the Lord coming from Sinai, up from Edom, entering into the land as a mighty storm and a dripping water. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth quaked, the heavens dripped, the clouds dripped water. The mountains quaked at the presence of the Lord. this Sinai at the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel. Judges 5, verses 4 and 5. And then, back to Jael. In the song, Deborah speaks of the blessedness of Jael. It says in Judges 5:24, most blessed of women is Jael. And of course, must be defined by who she's married to. The wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed is she of women in the tent. Deborah's song leaves the battlefield to retell the story of Sisera's death at the hands of Jael. Deborah acclaims Jael as the most blessed of women. Blessed is she, the woman in the tent. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman explained that Jael's blessedness exceeded even that of the matriarchs. They gave birth to children, but if not for Jael, their children would have been destroyed. And so she ranks up there with Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. The final scene of Deborah's song cuts from Sisera lying dead between Jael's feet to Sisera's mother gazing out the window, waiting for her son to return from battle. Deborah's feminine perspective on warfare. She thinks of the slain Sisera's mother. The maidservant attempts to console Sisera's mother by assuring her that her son is only delayed because he is busy plundering and dividing the spoil of the battle. But you and I, the reader, we know better. Before cutting to the scene of Sisera's mother apprehensively watching out the window, the Song of Deborah recounts his death at the hand of Jael. A vivid series of short sentences. This is where the Hebrew gets really wonky. They're even only one word long. It's really hard to translate this part, but it dramatically depicts Sisera's death in slow motion poetry. The suggestive and again almost sexual imagery creates an intentional, ironic reversal of expectation. And that's its kingdom perspective, kingdom of God, this reversal of expectation. When Sisera's mother asks, why does his chariot delay in coming? Judges 5:28. Her maidservant explains that Sisera and his men are busy, from the Hebrew, raping the Israelite women. A womb, 2 wombs for every warrior. Judges 5:30. That's the literal translation. But instead of raping Jael, Sisera dies between her feet, penetrated by a tent peg. I'm hoping you're picking up on the imagery there. That's really in the Hebrew. That's scandalous, by the way. His men lay dead on the field of battle. Consider the midrash here. What is written of him? Judges 4:3. He oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. What became of him? Because he abused and blasphemed while oppressing them, he died a shameful death, for God gave him into the hand of a woman. And then, as the Haftarahs are known to do, they like to end on a positive note. The rising of the sun. Judges 5:31. Thus let all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let those who love him be like the rising of the sun in its might. And this is such a fitting verse to go with if you're in a Mosaic class. This past Sunday's Mosaic lesson on the Transfiguration. The Song of Deborah closes with an allusion back to the opening theophany, which had depicted God rising over the land from the east. The allusion at the end of the song provides a bookend. Bible authors like bookends for the image of a strong approach from the east. Let those who love God be like the rising of the sun in its might. Deborah's triumphant image of the righteous shining bright like the sunrise inspired the sages to understand this passage as looking forward to the reward of the righteous in the Messianic era and in the world to come. From the Midrash Rabbah, how do we know that the original glory of Adam, he was a being of light only? How do we know that that glowing light, that sinless light, will be restored to man in the days of Messiah? We can infer that Adam's resplendence will be restored from the text, Judges 5:31. Those who love him will be like the rising of the sun in its might. Again from the Midrash Rabbah. What advantage is it for the righteous to store up a treasure of devout acts of kindness? It is enough for them that I will renew their faces like the sun, as it is written, Judges 5:31. Those who love him will be like the rising of the sun in its might. From Midrash Rabbah again, in the world to come, the Messianic era, when Messiah is here, he will restore the light of the faces of the righteous. We will all again be sinless and beings of light, as is written in Judges 5:31. Let those who love him be like the rising of the sun in its might. The apostolic writings, the New Testament, echo this rabbinic application of Judges 5:31. When Jesus was transfigured before his disciples, Matthew 17:2, his face shone like the sun. He had the resplendence of the atom before the fall. When the risen Messiah appeared to his disciple John, Revelation 1:16, his face was like the shining of the sun. And Jesus even quoted directly from the Song of Deborah when he told his disciples that at the time of his coming, Matthew 13:43, the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So Jesus himself quotes Judges 5:31 to point to the time of the Messiah. For us, the second coming of Messiah, when all sin will ultimately be eradicated and where those who have faith in the Messiah will shine with the brightness of the sun, just as our Messiah does. And just as he gave Peter, James, and John that glimpse of on the Transfiguration Mount. All right, we will close there. It's just a great story in the book of Judges there for you, and lots of meat. And again, it really highlights and celebrates two very important women in the Bible and their leadership role, and in many ways how they functioned as God's chosen redeemer for that particular generation and in that particular situation. So just good stuff there, and beautifully links with this week's Torah portion, which I always encourage you to listen to and read and study through, whether it's on your own or with the archives. But go through the Exodus portion for BESHALACH. But now you can do so with even more information kind of flowing in your mind of how the Bible works in cycles, right? And then when you get into books like Revelation, you'll begin to see that's what John is ultimately describing. He's describing these cycles, these images from the past, how they will come back and play themselves out yet again. All right, so let's close with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai noten hadavar. Blessed are you, Lord God, who has given to us the gift of the Scriptures. Amen. Shalom, shalom. Go in peace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for engaging this teaching. You know, we at Immanuel have as one of our goals to make our teachings available online to anyone, everywhere, at any time, whether that's through a podcast or our YouTube channel or an MP3 download. It is our gift to you, and we want you to use it however you see fit. Also, if you feel motivated or desire to support future teachings, you can do so with the donate button at the bottom of our teaching page. That's found at immlutheran.org/teaching. Again, thank you for participating in our teachings here, and hope to see you or engage with you somehow, some way, somewhere. God bless.